Hello and welcome to Must Read Fiction, a place for people who know that life is better with a novel in hand. I'm Erin Popelka, and I'm so delighted to be here today with author Erin Pringle. Welcome.
Oh, thanks for having me, other Erin.
Yes, I know we are both Erin P's. It's very exciting. A little bit about Erin Pringle. She grew up in Casey, Illinois, and currently lives in Spokane, Washington. She is the author of 2 collections of short stories, The Floating Other and The Whole World at Once. Her debut novel, which we're going to talk about today, is Hezada, I Miss You. I've got it here in my hands. It's so fun. I love the color, love the elephant. And let's just start with this. Tell me about Hezada, I Miss You.
So it's a very long story. Sometimes people call that a novel. It's just very long for a story. And it is set in sort of the present day, but it feels, I think all of my work kind of feels like a fairy tale setting, not Disney fairy tale, but folk tale, like the woods and the road and the path and the lone figure kind of moving through that. And so Hezada, I Miss You is set in the rural Midwest in a very small town, a village. When I used to teach there, I was teaching George Saunders one of his stories, and he called a village in the story a village. And all the students, are there still villages? Yes. And my book is also set in a village, and it's the day that the circus comes to town. The village is not doing well. The circus is not doing well. And their sort of nostalgic, beautiful past is one of the ways they cope with the tragedy of their lives, or at least the emptiness that they're constantly seeing reflected in the empty storefronts and in each other. And it revolves around twin siblings, Heza and Abe, and they live in the village, and their mother. And then it also follows a few of the people who've been in the circus for so long. The circus is like its own village. It just moves, which is also kind of a folk tale, you know, like the moving village. Yeah. Does that answer?
Yeah. Okay. No, that's great. That's great. And like, it's very much so a very literary tale where it's kind of about the experience and about sort of immersing in this day that passes, which is just like, I love how you said that it does feel like almost folktale-y, but it's also more just sort of like classic and, you know, applicable almost universally in terms of some of the themes and things happening in there. So yeah, which is really interesting, really fun. So tell me, so the circus comes to town, and so the circus is a big part of Hezada, I Miss You. What drew you to the circus, and what sort of research did you have to do, or what kind of visiting of circuses did you do to get some of the details right?
Well, I grew up in a town of 3,000, and the book is pretty much based on Westfield, Illinois, which is 15 minutes from Casey, and it's a village it was about 800 people when I was growing up, and now it's about at 600. And so when I was small, by the 1980s, the circus had gone corporate, or basically they moved from the traveling outside into arenas. And so I remember vividly my whole childhood, basically. And so I remember the circus that my sister and my mother took me to, because my sister was 16 years older than me. And I remember this moment, which I think is my relationship to the circus kind of is summed up in this moment where I was in the outer part of the arena where they're selling the balloons and things, and I remember I got transfixed by something, as one does when you're 5 or 6,
and it's the circus,
or 38. You know, it's the circus. You've never been to this before, and your sister's probably told you a great number of stories on the drive there. Now that I think about it, and so I was transfixed, and then I just reached up and took Jennifer's finger, my sister, and started walking with her. And then I looked up, and it was not my sister. It was this man. And then I just remember him looking down, confused as well. Like, why were we together? We didn't know.
Yeah.
And so then I remember looking around, and then there's my sister. I don't remember much what happens next, but just that was taken care of, but I think it had that kind of surreal moment where you become someone else. Even in the lobby, I became that man's little sister or daughter, and suddenly this was not my father, but we were moving together in this kind of intimate, nice relation. Like we were just walking down the lobby. I don't think he wasn't going to take me anywhere.
Right.
He might have looked down and like, oh, you're not Sarah.
Right.
What are we doing? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then in 3rd grade, we took a field trip to the circus. So we went back to that arena. But then I also remember Jennifer taking me to a traveling circus came through. And it was not an annual thing like in the novel. That was just useful. And I remember it being set up by the swimming pool, or maybe it was in a different town in Mattoon, because that makes sense too if I remember the sort of where the air shows used to be. But it was dismal. It was a gray Midwest day, and at least where I grew up in the Midwest, once the sky is gray, then you see how gray the roads are, and everything in between goes gray. So even it wasn't planting seed, it wasn't green, to break it up. But we went, and no one really was there, and the tents hadn't opened yet, but they were all dingy, and I remember we went into a tent where something spectacular was supposed to be, but I just remember not really feeling that it was spectacular, but then being confused because it was supposed to be spectacular. Sure. And then is it like, where's the problem? But that's just I just have that in, like, it wasn't working out. And so then, and my sister was the one who loved the circus. She was the one who, like, those reproduction signs. So she had the Ringling Brothers reproduction sign, and she was very interested in the circus, and she was writing about the circus when she died. And I think when she died, we'd had such a close relationship when I was a little girl, because she wasn't married yet, or it was so early in her marriage, there were no other children. So she had that kind of free time that one has, and I was there. And so a lot of shaping of memory is connected to her. So when she died, we hadn't been as close as adults, but I think it just kind of triggered all my childhood memories of her. And so the circus kind of made perfect sense of what to visit. I'd already been visiting it in my writing, but once she died, it made sense that this would be together. Yeah. And I think you write, I don't know, I think I was probably writing to her before she died, right? It's the circus, that's her thing. Yeah. That's, so,
yeah, absolutely.
Oh, and then once I knew I was going to once I was writing about the circus and it was getting closer, like 10 years had passed, then my partner Heather took me to the circus in Spokane, and it was as sad as I thought it was going to be. And she's crying while the elephant is performing, because now we know that the elephant is standing, but because of like inner trauma, the elephant's doing tricks. And so when I learned that, so then I had to have a great big circus book of all the photos from when it was in its more popular day. And so I liked learning about what you never see, like the clotheslines of them drying their stockings when they're not in performance.
Sure,
right?
Like the day-to-day life that has to hide behind the curtain.
Yeah, or they're wearing all their sequins, but they're just like having a cigarette by their camper. What is not centered, and that's what I am always drawn to, because it seems like what's not centered, at least in entertainment, tends to be more honest and truthful. Like you can really see the people. Yeah. And so so I started kind of shifting into thinking about the people who were in this strange situation where they had to perform roles that didn't necessarily fit who they were, for people who only saw the role but didn't see their clothes drying. So you're not asked to see the connection. Which I think is a huge loss, right? Like we're all drying our socks. But it looks like the circus is something better than your own life, because they're not drying their socks, but they are drying themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And I think that in the modern day too, especially with the advent of social media, like there is this projection that we all tend to do. Like, life is perfect. Here's my vacation shots. Here's my perfect children. Like, happy family. But that isn't authentic. That doesn't give rise to like the messiness that is day-to-day life, the messiness that is our families and our humanity. And so I'm really grateful that you're willing to explore those drying socks in your novel, in your work, you know, because it gives us permission to all just dry our socks.
That's right. Read my book because we dry socks in it.
But they're glittery because it's the circus. Yeah, right, but they're awesome socks. Yeah, and so I think that's really, really interesting. And you know, set this in a small town, and so I think that dynamic is also at play in small town living, right? Where everyone's really together, everybody knows everybody's business, and there's this dynamic of, well, can you hide? What do you hide?
Yes, like because secrets and the veneer of wellness is also a form of protection, right? To protect you and your family from people's assumptions about you, you know, because we have these very simplistic narratives about like, if you lost your job, you must be lazy, right? And so instead of, like, my dad had manic depression, and my parents were born in the 30s, so it was high masculinity, you know, and very stigmatized if to have any illness, much less a mental one, and so it was never really talked about outside of the house, right? But he wasn't going places. I mean, he couldn't work anymore. So people knew something was going on, but it was never discussed, do you know? And so that was both a way to protect things, but also alienating, because then I couldn't talk to anybody about, you know, like I didn't feel comfortable saying like, oh yeah, he's sleeping again today because the medication's really too heavy, right? I couldn't say that to my friend Ashley, or I didn't even think to, because we were performing a family that was fine but not fine, do you know?
Totally.
And she too, like, was also had to perform because her family she was having hard times too. So we were both in this kind of like bonded but couldn't talk about it. Yeah,
which is such a hard place to be, right? Like, because it sacrifices your own authenticity and the truth of your story for projecting that everything's fine when everything's not fine. So really hard journey. And so you, when I was researching this interview, you gave a really lovely quote to Michael Knoll at readtowritestories.com, and I'm going to read your words back to you, which I know is a little awkward.
No, it's great. No, I mean, it's not. No, don't do that. Just do what you're going to do, Erin P.
So it is lovely. I'm going to read this quote by the other Erin P. I figured out how to create motion, and you're talking about like your short stories. So my stories are an arrangement of paintings or panels of a very large painting. Words are like watercolors, but with the agility of oil paint and their ability to be maneuvered over long periods of time before they dry. And so I love so much about this quote. I love the tie to a different artistic medium. I love the tie to painting. And I love this idea of maneuvering things over time. You're right, because watercolor is very instantaneous. When that's on the page, that's on the page. But oil, you have this moment where it is drying and you can continue to manipulate it. So can you talk to me a little bit more about your manipulation process and how you approach writing that way and how that works in your revising process?
Sure. So I didn't. So I grew up going to a diner with my parents. My father, who wasn't working anymore, and my mother, who was unable to work because she was because I was a child. And so I would draw on napkins. That's how I spent at least 2 hours every day, because we'd go in the morning and in the afternoon, and they would talk to each other or to others in the diner. And so I drew, and my dad had been a visual artist. I mean, he'd been a draftsman, and he hated that, but he was really an artist at heart. And so there were his sculptures from before he was ill in the house, and in the middle of rural Illinois, right? Like abstract metal sculptures in the backyard, and paintings, and but he was still doing photography when I was growing up. And so I would go with him in the van driving along country roads and he was looking for something beautiful, maybe. And so that's where he taught me how to frame beauty out of what's not. And we used to look at art books together in the library, and that was wonderful. So I thought I was going to be a visual artist. You know, everything pointed to it, and that's how I spent all of my time if I wasn't reading. Right? But reading just felt like, well, that's just what you do. You know, you don't have to practice that. You just read. I mean, I was, but, you know, as a kid, like, you're just reading. So then in college, so my way of thinking and my way of putting things together is a way of drawing and painting. So when I start a story, I usually have like 3 or 4 imagined paintings that the story revolves around, and then I have to figure out how to make it work as a story. And in college, I was taking a drawing class and a creative writing class. And in my problem with painting, my personal, like, I wanted it to be, you know, like in Rembrandt, you can see the skin tone, like it looks photographic. I wanted to paint like that. I wanted to be able to make flesh tones look like you photographed them, but you didn't.
Sure.
Right? But I was never able to do that. And then I was taking this creative writing class, and the professor said, you don't need to waste time describing the character because the reader's just going to imagine his girlfriend anyway. And I was like, that's brilliant. That's great. That saves me. So just like within a minute, I could do in writing what had taken years of painting and I never achieved, because that's really all I want. Like, that's all I wanted out of a like the process of painting. So then I just moved into writing, and it's wonderful, right? Because you don't have, if you just want people to see flesh tone, you just want people to see like gradations of color, it doesn't take much in words to do that. But Erin, this is a long answer too.
It's okay. It's a good one. It's a really good one.
So my problem is, so poetry handles painting better, I think, right? Because you have to condense the language into images and in such a way that it feels like a painting is growing as you read it. Well, imagistic poetry, which is what I tend toward, or expressionist poetry. But I accidentally signed up to be a fiction writer. So I had to figure out, which does not move in the same way as poetry does. So I had to figure out how to move a story in a way that also I was able to create these images, which is what I love to do. The what connects the people, I'm not interested in. Why they're together, I'm not interested in. I mean, until I write, you know, like, it's fine once it happens, but I don't really believe in cause effect, which is a problem if you're writing a story, because it's all cause effect, right? So that's what I was kind of trying to say about creating these sort of still pictures and then moving them in a way that it feels like you're in a gallery and there's progression. But if you were to look at any still image, there's no progression.
Right. And it has that good autonomy to it too, right? It is almost like, because it's, if like your father was teaching you how to find beauty from, you know, a frame that might not seem, or a landscape that might not seem beautiful, in the same way that writing gives permission to find beauty in a moment, right? In like a lived moment, because you get that, like, that 3-dimensional character, and you get the feeling of
intensify.
Yeah. So interesting. It's such an interesting way to look at it too. I think that, you know, so often it's like writing, reading, it's like plot, things are happening, you know, but to instead kind of take it back and say, no, let's take these snapshots, let's take these scenes, let's take these panels, and let's put it all together and see how that moves. Like, that's a fascinating idea.
Yeah, because I think I would like to add memories into the reader so that it changes how they think about the world. And if I'm telling them a story, I don't think it instills images in the same way. But we remember folk tales because the images are so vivid, you know, like cutting the wolf open and filling him with stones, and then he runs and dies. You know, like, you remember that in a way that changes the way your other memories move against each other. And I mean, I could write a beginning, middle, end story, but then you sacrifice images. You can't have both, right? You can't have, or it's very difficult to have an action movie that has incredible deep character moments where we're going into their memory for a long time.
Right.
Not just like enough to, this is why he's killing everyone because his wife is dead. You know, like the moment.
Yeah. Oh, so I love that phrase, like that you want to instill memories in the reader, and so that's just really beautiful. And I think I love too that relationship that you're sensing your reader as you're constructing the narrative, which is also really beautiful and a really symbiotic relationship. So thank you.
Thank you, Erin.
Yeah, and so with that said, must readers, please do check out Hezada, I Miss You by Erin Pringle. Such a fantastic book, such a fantastic read. And Erin Pringle, thank you so very much for taking the time to speak with me today.
Thank you for finding me. She came to my book release party and I never have ever met her, and now we're both from the Midwest. We're very pleased. This is us being very pleased about,
Connections on Must Read Fiction. So good. Well, thank you, and happy writing.
Yes.